Hello, everybody. Many thanks to the organizers of this session and congratulations for the development of the conference. We are aware that it's not an easy task, especially in this strange situation still under the impact of the pandemic. We are Javier Monclús and Carmen Díez from the University of Zaragoza, and we are going to present now our paper entitled Urban Projects by an Architecturbanistic Tandem, Rafael Moneo and Manuel de Sola Morales.
Okay, so the starting point of our paper is the hypothesis that in the last third of the 20th century, star architects complete a series of large-scale architectural projects with outcomes that didn't always benefit the city. However, there were other urban projects which could be considered as part of the qualitative urbanism which has been relevant during all these years. In order to understand the key points of this qualitative urbanism, it is important to consider the work of some architects who show a powerful will to reunify or reintegrate architecture and urbanism. In our paper and presentation, we focus on the contributions of two Spanish architects, the tandem Rafael Moneo and Manuel de Sola Morales. So, we will first make a short review of their backgrounds and approaches. Second, we will comment three urban projects where the tandem show a shared will of integrating architecture and urbanism. Finally, we will make some comments on the paradigmatic character of those projects, all of them far from star architect flagship projects of the time. Before getting into the discourses on the relationship between architecture and urbanism on the last decades of the 20th century, we consider the visions of some architects interested in the urban dimension of architecture and the historical and morphological dimension of urbanism. So we start remembering some moments where we can find theories and projectual strategies that illustrate the processes of contamination between urbanism and architecture in the context of the late 1950s and 1960s. One of the most important moments were the renewed visions of the Tin Ten debates, particularly the discourse by Jaap Bakema, who coined the term architecture urbanism. This was a central Tin Ten issue, which was best shown Bakema's approach with his powerful idea in a TV program of the mid-1960s entitled Van Stol tot de Stad in Dutch. And this was a sort of slogan where he considered the need to integrate various scales from share to city, or better, as he said later, from doorstep to city.
The theoretical discourses and works of the Spanish architects Rafael Moneo and Manuel de Sola Morales form part of this attitude, demonstrating the inseparability between architecture and urbanism. They first met in 1968 when Sola Morales became professor of urbanism at the Barcelona School of Architecture, and 2 years later, Moneo got the chair of architectural composition at the same school, where both were members of the editing team of Arquitecturas Bis, a benchmark publication for Spanish architecture. This marked the beginning of a friendship that led them to work together on some projects. Rafael Moneo, born in 1937, graduated from the Madrid Architecture School in 1961. At the age of 24, he was collaborating with Jørn Utzon in Hellebeek, Denmark, in the Sydney Opera project, and afterwards he spent 2 years at the Spanish Academy in Rome. In 1966, he was teaching in Eisenman's IUS and in the Cooper Union in New York. And it was in the late 70s and early 80s that he became a visiting professor at the schools of architecture of both Princeton and Harvard universities, as well as the University of Lausanne, Switzerland. In 1985, Moneo was named chairman of the architecture department of the Harvard University Graduate School of Design, a position he held until 1990. In 1996, he was awarded the Pritzker Prize of Architecture. Moneo's work in urban context reveals the attention he has always paid to the city. Manuel de Sola Morales graduated from the Barcelona School of Architecture in 1963 and from the Faculty of Economics 3 years later, thus demonstrating an intellectual curiosity that stretched beyond architecture. Although his circumstances differed from Rafael Moneo's, he also had an Italian adventure, in his case training with Ludovico Quaroni. After immersing himself in the history of Rome, like Moneo, Sola Morales went to Harvard to study a master's degree in city planning at the Graduate School of Design, with José Luis Sert as his tutor. From the following decade, morphological strategies were developed by the Barcelona Urbanism Laboratory, a research group founded on Sola Morales' initiative in 1969. It is no wonder that the joint projects by Sola Morales and Moneo consolidated that shared determination to understand architecture based on the city and vice versa. The work of this architecturbanistic tandem has not yet been considered in the depth it deserves, so we are going to present here 3 of the projects they collaborated. Let's see the first one, a project for the urban renewal of Zaragoza Old Town. This competition afforded them the opportunity, first, to work on a historic center undergoing functional obsolescence processes at the time, and second, to take advantage of modernization in a major urban growth cycle. As in other Spanish and European cities, awareness of heritage and cultural assets in historic urban places was growing. Resistance to radical interventions involving mass demolition associated with major thoroughfare renewals was on the rise because the renewal ideas approved by some urban stakeholders and important architects still persisted. In this context, the urban design by Moneo and Sola Morales was truly innovative, as it managed to strike a balance between carefully defining urban forms on small scale and radical reorganization of the traffic system and access to the historic center. Although the scales of the interventions differed, they were approached as an integrated solution. Drastic reorganization of traffic citywide by creating major thoroughfares and great separations of main streets, new large building linking the historic center and the main boulevard of the city, and the creation of a series of new public spaces and squares to allow the route to reach the cathedral squares. This square enhanced the value of the city's main religious and civil buildings. The plan provides a detailed definition of the project in the historic center on an architectural level, while the structural sections and the traffic diagrams define the radical street network reorganization as a sign of trust in the small-scale city center managing to integrate into a much larger street network system.
Let's now to the second urban project, the Vitoria Grade Housing Development. While the Zaragoza project was paradigmatic of the typical 1960s discussion on intervention in historical centers, the proposal for the local, short of new town, housing estate in Vitoria echoes theoretical interest in the subject of collective housing. And this debate emerged from the general criticism of disappointing results of modernist housing estates. The low-rise, high-density housing formula had already emerged in the 1960s as an alternative to the rigid tower and slab model. A more human architecture was sought and would combine the advantages of urban intensity with those of the suburban residential complexes built in the first half of the 20th century. Moneo and Solá Morales addressed urban residential development as a theoretical issue by exploring new possible models, qualifying the garden suburbs and Sillungen of modern tradition. In Vitoria, as in other medium-sized Spanish cities, the shift from traditional compact and continuous to modern and open urban forms happened by adding urban fragments, superblocks, and housing estates linked to the road infrastructure. This situation led the tandem to rule out both the ensanche or city extension model and the Newton model in their plan. The exceptional scale of the intervention, 3,000 dwellings, led Moneo and Solá Morales to explore a new model, a dense collective housing development based on the concept of single-family houses as an alternative to modern housing estates with towers and slabs, and also to the urban block, which was making a comeback at the time. The project purpose was to make city based on a comprehensive use of land with a dense and repetitive scheme, a continuous order based on a rationalist models, but with sophisticated subdivision tools that could qualify public spaces. The private character of the houses is afforded by separate accesses, contact with the land and greenery, and everyday features such as homes, gardens, shops, schools, streets, and parks. And now the third urban project, the so-called Illa Diagonal, a superblock in Barcelona. In this case, the project forms part of the urban strategies at the end of the 1980s, which, compared with a more limited intervention at the start of the decade, with the squares and public spaces, were associated with a leaping scale due to the plans of the 1992 Olympic Games. Illa Diagonal was therefore built at a time of grand projects, where areas of centrality or strategic areas and large-scale works were fashionable. As happened in Zaragoza and Vitoria, the building definition cannot be separated from the urban layout. Nevertheless, its large size, over 300 meters long, is usually studied with strictly visual consideration, emphasizing the quality of its architecture as a large lying-down skyscraper, qualifying the urban landscape. Along these lines, the integrated approach to public and private spaces and the enhancement of collective spaces represent an innovative thinking on their meaning. Compared with the more or less literal recovery of urban blocks, the illas or manzanas, lots, a trend in Barcelona and almost everywhere at that time, the Olympic Village, for example, Moneo and Solá Morales managed to fill the space on the site with a large-scale building. Rather than an urban block, a tower, a slab, it is a hybrid piece conditioned by the urban layout and designed to ensure the continuity of the city's fabric. The idea was to exploit the potential of Diagonal Avenue as the medium for architecture capable of making city. Consequently, the Illa Diagonal is a complex design strategy seeking to resolve the tension between unity and diversity, a paradigmatic example of the best architectural urbanism through a project that stands out for its architectural quality and urban intensity. We'd like to conclude with a couple of comments on the work by Moneo and Solá Morales. Despite these projects belong to very different periods and urban situations, they show a common thread of integrating architectural and urbanistic perspectives. The three projects we have selected are, in some way, paradigmatic in the innovative way they approach urban situations. The first one in Zaragoza as the careful urban renewal of a historical center in the 1960s. The second one in Vitoria as another possible residential extension strategy. The third one in Barcelona Superblock, as a large-scale building project that links two urban forms of the city. The three projects share a marked emphasis in their respective design origins on interdependence between the street layout, urban morphology, and architectural design strategies. Summing up, we could say that it is true that in the last quarter of the 20th century was marked by flagship projects that often became irrelevant. But at the same time, there were others, such as those presented here, which were much more interested in the integration of architecture in the city. So not all large-scale projects were run flagship projects. So that's all. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.